All right, good morning, everybody. I certainly wish I could be there in person, but thanks to Michelle and the team, we're going to do our best to come in virtually today. We've got a great, I guess, 2 hours ahead for us. And I want to get us started by just reminding everybody, feel free to take pictures of the screen. If there's a slide that you enjoy, reminder too, that I'll share, or Michelle or the team will share the slides from our presentation today. I'm actually coming to you live out in the heart of the mountains of Western North Carolina. Hopefully get out before the hurricane that's coming up through the Gulf. But here, just like many of you, in a place trying to help communities find a direction forward on childcare. And it's a conversation that continues. And so over the next 45 minutes or so, we're going to leave time for questions, and we'll do our best to along the way, if there's a particular question, touch on it. But to really start to break down what seems like a huge and complex challenge before us around childcare into ways that for community leaders such as yourselves and such a great audience, I had a chance to take a look at everybody who is in attendance this morning. Certainly some familiar faces. We have a great panel ahead. And some new faces. And as we think about today, it's really about understanding that there are opportunities for everyone, right? And when we think about what that means, we understand that people are at different stages of the process around childcare. And we're going to talk a little bit about what that means and maybe give some direction so you can self-identify maybe where you're at in the process. But no big surprise, in the moment, we know that many of our communities represented here today are really struggling as a critical issue around childcare. And the stats further support that. I actually had a chance several weeks ago to be out in Washington, D.C. for the first ever USDA National Child Care Forum. So it's lifting up even to agencies and entities that historically may not have always had a play or a thought around childcare. But the key takeaway, and you'll hear about it more today, but from that forum that is being talked about certainly at a national level, is that childcare ultimately is infrastructure. Just like our roads, just our highways, our buildings, and all the other things that help make our communities what they are, we understand that childcare more and more is being seen as that critical infrastructure. And it's something also that was highlighted at that summit, that people want to stay close to home, right? People move for a number of reasons. We often think about economic reasons, can't find maybe a role or job in your community. You eventually end up looking somewhere else. And we're seeing that start to play out both here in Minnesota as well as other communities when it comes to childcare. At the end of the day, if you don't have a safe, quality environment for your child, inevitably you don't either go to work or your conditions are different. And at some point, as we're seeing childcare migration start to play out, people are moving from one community to another simply due to the lack of childcare. And when we think about what this problem means to our country, a big number there, right? $122 billion is the annual cost of the childcare shortages. And when we think about that, that's a really big number. And when we bring it down and distill it to just Minnesota, that means 2.1 billion with a B dollars that our communities, our main streets, and others are missing out. And just to give comparison, because I'm one of those guys that likes fun facts to help me remind something, maybe a fun fact to share at a gathering this weekend. When we think about $2.1 billion, and if we were to stack that amount in $100 bills, as a point of reference, it'd be almost 10 times the height of the IDS Center in downtown Minneapolis, right? Imagine that, 10 times the height of that building in $100 bills stacked tightly represents our lost opportunity as a state and certainly as a community. And what I think about, and there's, I believe, some supporting material that you can take on your way out, our fundamental belief is that this is about wage realization. Right? And what is wage realization? You might ask. It's really just two simple words put together that carry strong meaning, right? When we think about our communities, it's about the ability for moms and dads, and frankly, more particular moms, who've been disproportionately impacted by our childcare crisis. We saw it play out during the pandemic, and the trails of that continue to show up today. But we think about people who want to go to work are limited if they don't have childcare, right? None of your communities, I'm certain, have packs of 2 and 3 and 4-year-olds running Main Street. And we know that it is impacting our economies. It's impacting our families. And when people can't go to work, we start to limit our economic growth. And at the end of the day, that limited economic growth, as I've seen in many rural communities around this country, really begins to impact the community well-being, right? The outcomes and the opportunities for our community. So when we start to look at the numbers, right? We're at $122 billion, and we came down to $2.1 billion. And the next stat here, well, rough math, gives you perspective of what's the missed opportunity just in our region. $54 million. And that's estimated on some just current data that our team pulled around licensing, expected number of children with all available parents working somewhere near this number. But the truth is that $122 billion, $2 billion, and even $54 million is often too big of a number for many of us to really understand. I've never seen $1 billion. Frankly, I've never seen $1 million, and maybe some of you in this audience have. But what is real is that we know that this impact boils down to our local communities, right? We think about different communities. We think about Bach. We think about Bruno. We think about Quamba, Dalbo Township, right? All smaller communities. And we come back to the idea that are full of residents that enjoy their lives there. And for our families, even more so, they've chosen those communities as the places they've wanted to raise their children. And we know, as I've said just a moment ago, if there's no child care, the impact can be devastating to those small communities. And we think about Harris, Minnesota, what would one family child care mean in that community, right? About 400 residents, I believe. That's what we're talking about today. I caution everybody to not get caught up in the big, complex, and really scary challenge of childcare and distill it down to, in your own community, what can we do to even bring one family childcare forward? Or what can we do to support one family childcare provider? And just to give you a perspective too on the numbers within the region, when we come back to this idea of the potential shortfall, in this exercise, I also looked at just the overall setting of childcare available within our counties. And when you look at yours, it's actually quite encouraging. I would say the local efforts to date are actually starting to see some wins. Well, maybe not enough, and maybe we need more. Hats off to everybody in the room and within the region who is making an impact. And I'll tell you why I know that impact is there. When we look broadly at the state of Minnesota, just over 5,800 family providers. And by the way, since about 2015, that's down from over 12,000 family providers within our state. But where I look at the stats, I've been looking at these stats since 2015 on a regular basis, is what percentage of those providers have less than 5 years of service, and how many of those providers, based on licensing, have more than 20 years of service. And you might say, well, why, Jeff, do you focus on those? And the reason being is those are our spots to keep an eye on. The easy one sometimes, maybe for most, is that once you've been doing this for 20 years, and I've worked with hundreds of family providers, you start getting a little bit tired maybe of chasing the toddler around or figuring out all the fun activities that you're going to do with the preschoolers, right? So we know that our time at some point will come to an end. As a matter of fact, the longest serving or licensed family provider in your community has been at it for 34 years. As a matter of fact, of the providers with more than 20 years of service, their average length of service is just over 25 years. And so you've got a really strong group of individuals that have been doing this for a period of time, but representing only 27% against the state average of 33% of providers with more than 20 years of service. And we've really seen that play out in the last number of years, handful of years, is due to a lot of reasons, pandemic and everything else, regulation, all the reasons that we've heard. We've simply been working against a mathematical reality, which is a number of providers that started a number of years ago and finally got to a point where they were no longer interested in providing care. Now, on the flip side, the under 5 becomes an area that we focus on because we know some parents, some mothers often have become family child care providers because of why? They couldn't find their own child care for their own children. And next thing you know, they've got their child and a few other children, and we're making them a licensed provider. But in many cases, I just talked to a family provider last week before heading south, and she said, you know, when my child enters kindergarten, I'm back to doing my marketing job that I so enjoy doing. I'm only doing this because we couldn't find childcare, and it became a better decision for us. So we look at those stats. Overall, your length of service average within the region is 11.8 years against a state average of over 14. So the point I'm making here is that you're seeing an increased number of providers with less than 5 years of service, which can only be truly accounted for by the work of those that are charged with making that happen and encouraging and supporting our providers. Overall, as a group, a number of centers still focus on the area, but back to the idea that family child care is often sometimes our best solution for some of our smaller communities. I highlight the fact that family child care, nearly almost all instances, is going to provide a same quality outcome and output for those children as those that might attend a center or a school-based program. Big believer of mixed use or mixed choice delivery, understanding that even as you talk to providers, and even in my time here today, and I'm sure anyone in the field in the room would acknowledge, challenging behaviors are increasing, all sorts of extras and things that are happening. And so being mindful of how we support those providers can make a big difference about how well Harris, for instance, might do in the future, providing the specific childcare needs that families and children are looking for. So it gives us an idea and a basis of understanding of break this challenge down into smaller, more consumable pieces, no matter what it is you decide as a community, and there's an individual who might have an opportunity to lead. Don't assume that we can fix it all in one run. I tell that to every community I work with. We're not here to solve the challenge of childcare. We're here to make the conditions better so that we all win as a community, including our providers. And you'll hear about that as well. So what's the theme, right? What does this really distill down to? It's the idea of what's your address for success. I travel over 60,000 miles a year by road. I love it. You got to love driving by road, certainly, to embark on that. But what it's allowed me the chance to do is see all sorts of different places. I've seen the birthplace Raggedy Ann and Andy in Illinois. I've seen the dinosaur places in Montana. I've seen all sorts of things, but I would have never seen any of them without having an address of where I was going on my way. Even coming up here into the mountains of North Carolina, you can be sure I downloaded the offline maps. I had an address in. Why? Because otherwise I'd still be wandering around hoping I found the spot here to come to you live today, right? We do this all the time. We benefit from Google Maps or Waze or whatever your choice of navigation is because it gives us confidence. It gives us clarity on the different choices might we even have, right? Sometimes I got 3 choices. I can take the scenic route if I've got all the time in the world, or if I'm really needing to get there on time, it tells me the pedal to the metal opportunity might shave me a few minutes off. But we've all done it, right? And we do it because we know it's going to get us there, and it's going to get us there successfully. So you might say, well, how do I even know where I'm supposed to be going? I'm not quite sure where I'm at. And maybe some of you are thinking that. And the way that I help you start to find focus is that at Business of Child Care, we really think there are 3 stages of readiness that most communities are finding themselves in. The first is the one that I think is less and less these days, is understanding the impact, right? Even the numbers I shared with you there is a snapshot of understanding. And even if you believe that number is not quite true, even half of it, right? 27, $28 million. What would that new wages being realized mean for spending on our main streets or in our housing, as I heard was a topic here earlier this year? How will that happen, right? And so understanding the impact often is the first step in gaining confidence to even take on this challenge. And once you figured out what the impact is, and where we found a lot of energy towards is really developing the plan, right? Finding that address for success. That's why I'm standing here in Jackson County is over a course of days doing a number of listening sessions and talking to everybody who is impacted or benefits from childcare about what's important to them. And really, again, not trying to fix everything, but developing a plan that might take on 3 to 5 opportunities or challenges that are impacting our community. And then more and more communities, some even in this audience today, have a plan, maybe have visibility on what that outcome is that they're looking for, but they need help, right? Activating the plan. It's one thing to know you need infant toddler care. It's another to figure out how do you strategically and intentionally activate that outcome in a way that is the least amount of burden for all involved. So think about that for yourself, right? Where is your community at today, right? Are you still trying to figure out if you've got a reason to act, or are you so far into knowing you need to act that you need help making those actions come true? Good resources around our state to help be a partner at whatever stage that you're in. But I think what's really a critical piece for us to not lose sight of is that it does require us to bring the whole community to the table. And as you see right in the middle of this, we center childcare in the universe, at least for this exercise, understanding that everybody on the arc there benefits from having good quality childcare in our communities. And if you're uncertain why or how, let me just walk you through real quick, right? And I'm going to start with our yellow, right? Our education leaders, talking to superintendents, talking to elementary principals, and even kindergarten teachers will tell you they can tell which kids were in an environment that provided some kind of quality support for children progressing through those earliest years, right? 0 to 5. And so we know if children of all backgrounds and all walks of life show up day one at kindergarten somewhat prepared for that journey to begin, they have a much better chance of success. And we see how that plays out later on in those school years, right? The Perry Preschool Study and many others have illustrated even third grade reading can be traced back to the experience of that child, both in whatever childcare early ed setting they have, but also how did we support our parents? How did our families get supported to even take the opportunity to read every day to their children? These are all things that our education leaders will point out come as a result of good experiences before 5. Our community leaders, our government leaders often are at the table for a number of reasons, sometimes economic vitality and economic development. Other times it's the police chief who is sitting at the table, and you might think that's a bit striking. Well, the reason being is that we often think in this conversation just 0 to 5, but you don't magically become no longer a need to support when you turn 6 or 7 or 8 or 9, right? And we have some communities where in this example, the police chief's at the table because the school agers are running rampant down Main Street because there's no options nearby for children after school or for days off of school or all of the other scenarios in which us as parents find ourselves in a hard place, right? We've got to be in our work, and yet our children need to be someplace as well. And certainly probably a big focus for this audience, our workforce, our employment leaders, our business leaders, more and more understanding that while they're not responsible to resolve this challenge, there's a benefit for them if they can be a part of these solutions as well. And we're seeing that play out, right? The U.S. Chamber Foundation, nationally, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, even locally here, the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce, and many economic development leaders are standing up and saying, we want to be a part of this. We want to help this, because the short story here is we have workforce leaders who are short tens of employees for shifts. I talked to one recently in the last year, that individual factory owner, second shift, 55 open positions. Part of the reason we talked to the HR team, they said, listen, we've got a number of people who are more than willing to come and do this work, but so-and-so, there's no second shift care license anywhere in our community. And so that punchline here, the workforce leader there, at the end of the day in this state, in this community, put forth some land, put forth some money with the promise that the solution coming forward was going to include some second shift care. right? And the reason that became such an easy decision for that factory leader is their $500,000 investment was going to unlock $7.5 million in revenue realization, because suddenly some of those second shift openings were going to have the opportunity to be filled by childcare. And we certainly don't overlook the importance, the leadership, and the strength that our existing early childhood advocates, our regional partners, continue to bring to this work, right? Initiative Foundation and others locally, many of the counties have organizations. Those also are part of our equation. And fundamentally at the foundation, it's our community, right? That wins when we start to look at childcare, not just as that unaffordable cost for our parents, not just for that untenable situation that we might see it as a community, but it really becomes an opportunity for everybody to find a win, right? No one has to lose in your push to create better conditions, right? And that's, I think, a really important piece that as we talk through some things here are going to be important to take note, right? So it's a whole community approach, centering childcare at the center of the universe for this exercise that really enables us to start getting serious about how we can do that. And if you're in that place where you're still not quite ready or have focus, or you've got 50 things on the list of things to go get, we all know running after 50 things is nearly impossible, right? And I often think we've got 5 fingers for the fact that I can remember 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things. And if we start to think about that, what we do as an organization, what you can do on your own is get those beneficiaries together. We do it in a number of different ways, listening sessions and others. It doesn't matter ultimately, as long as you bring everybody to the table. And the exercise for everybody that comes to the table is, first off and foremost, understand what your opportunities, your challenges, and your problems are. This has always been, or at least historically, a doom and gloom conversation, which doesn't make people feel often very good. And often when we have these conversations, our heads either hurt from the enormity of the problem, or our heads hurt because we're not quite certain how to take a step forward. And I think it's true for all of us that you first got to figure out what is it that's even possible to think about moving forward. And to the comment of not always being doom and gloom, what is your community missing from a lack of childcare, right? We're talking so much about what the shortages are and the impact there, but we're forgetting sometimes of what's the opportunity that we could unlock if we could unlock some scenarios in which conditions were better for all involved to make this happen. And once we do that, the hardest part of this exercise, and it repeats itself with every community I work with, is don't jump right to the solution. Figure out first what is in fact the win. Because this is what the most interesting thing for me is, that if we all just said, listen, our desired outcome is more childcare, I often say to communities, if we deliver 1 new slot, then I guess we won. Right? And the truth is 1 slot's not enough. And so back to the idea of Address for Success, if you don't know what it is you're trying to do, it isn't just more childcare. As an example, a couple of weeks ago, it might be infant toddler care, might be care for children with exceptional needs. It might be a bilingual preschool that engages some of our Spanish-speaking families, right? It doesn't have to be we're going to solve childcare. The wins can be incremental, right? What's the old saying? Best way to eat an elephant is what? 1 bite at a time. But we have to understand first the win. And once you understand the win, organizations such as myself and others in the room are much better equipped, even yourself could be much better equipped to figure out then what is in fact the right solution. And I highlight this because often in shortage situations, which many of our communities find ourselves in, many of our incoming calls from communities are starting at, we need to build a childcare center. Right? And anybody who understands the math of a childcare center knows that communities like Harris often can't support on their own a childcare center. And yet we bring ourselves to that ask because that's often what we just think of, or what our experience has been when there's a shortage of childcare, right? Bigger capacity, more kids, look at us, we'll solve the problem. And some maybe in the room, and certainly if you walked out, would tell you, well, and the other issue is where are all the staff that will run those centers, right? So we're starting to see and highlight what some of our barriers have been just overall, because we've always reverted to kind of the standard punchline that many of us, just from our own travels and experience, sometimes consider. So think about what is building, or what does it look like for you to build an actual plan? An actual plan that doesn't just restate the obvious, you need more infant toddler care, but maybe starts to break down again with your citizen partners. What are the actual action steps to get to that outcome? And maybe our initial goal is we just want to create 8 new infant slots somewhere, right? We didn't solve the problem of infant toddler care, but we took a step forward. We found a win when we get just even 8 slots, right? 8 individuals going to work and doing what they want to do. Not only good for them, probably good for their families, good for the children, good for a lot of reasons. So before you start running after, build a plan that's built with intention, built with an understanding of what are the wins for the moment, understanding too, we can always come back, right? We can always come back and add more things once we got a few things across the finish line. It becomes much easier to get even more support because now suddenly you've got momentum. You've got some wins. And even as business owners in the room, we know, right? We get people interested in us when we're finally defining some wins, seeing some wins. It's just a natural outcome that we think about. So get organized for action, certainly before you do anything. But once you're ready to take action, I think it's really, really, really important to highlight the 2 kind of fundamentals that should be applied as pillars towards that goal of wage realization. First and foremost, we have to always, and over, not a one and done kind of deal, support our existing childcare business owners and operators, right? Our in-home family providers. We're seeing more and more examples where family childcare here in Minnesota can be placed outside of the home. Whatever the setting that those providers in, we remind ourselves they have been carrying the heavy water for so many years, often without thanks. I was just in another audience a couple of weeks ago, family providers, and I said, hey, when's the last time we had like an appreciation event? And they looked at me dumbfounded, like, well, what are you talking about? Right? And maybe in your own community, you haven't even thought about this, but this is the easiest win to start with. If you haven't done anything, is throw an appreciation event. Don't stack it up with trainings and a bunch of announcements and things you want them to do. Just throw a good old-fashioned party and say thank you. The impact is immeasurable. I always tell audiences and communities it doesn't certainly fill the tank, so to speak, but it gets it off bouncing off of empty, right? And that's what we're doing. We're on the fuel low mode right now. We don't even see the miles left till the car runs out of gas. And so if your community is in a crisis, you haven't done some of these basic steps, this is your first and biggest win, because I've seen over and over communities who went right to the win of build something new. And while they celebrated the grand opening, they had much regret because at the same time they had lost, in some cases, even more capacity out the back door of providers existing who said, well, what about me? Right? I've been doing this forever. I've been trudging through. I've been working 60 hours a week for 15 years. No one ever gave me anything. Right? We can imagine human nature. That makes sense. And so what it is, it starts there. It starts with appreciation, acknowledgement, but it certainly can elevate beyond that, right? What can we do as a local chamber to maybe create some business connections, right? You don't need to know anything about childcare to be able to help or provide or ask questions about bookkeeping, or to ask questions more and more about, in some communities, marketing. How do you market yourself, right? A lot of our providers never had to done that. So there's all sorts of ways to do it. They don't all cost millions of dollars to do, and yet they can be so impactful for the benefit of our existing providers to not only resource and recognize them, but invite them into this conversation. Let them help guide us on where their challenges are, what maybe their barriers to entry were when they got started, right? I just talked to another thing. All I do is talk to providers. I do that and community leaders because I love the work I'm doing. But, you know, she was talking about the fact she would have started 2 years earlier. What was her limitation? Her limitation was she didn't have the $5,000 or so dollars she decided she needed to buy the right crib, to buy the right equipment and materials, to buy the right learning materials, to buy a curriculum, to do all the things that she knew she wanted to do. She didn't have the money. She didn't know how to ask. She didn't have family who had it, and she sure didn't have a savings account to do that. And yet for all of us in this room, we realize that 2 years, 104 weeks of 8 adults who didn't get a chance to have their child in a place, not only picked that child maybe, but created a loss of opportunity for 2 years for those individuals who now might benefit from it, right? So the cost to return on investment or value is such a big impact, it's worth taking a look at. And I talk a lot about family childcare, but your centers are just as much of need, right? We sometimes assume because they're a much larger operation. In some cases, if you don't know, they're pushing over $1 million in top line revenue a year in tuition and other services being provided. And yet sometimes they're not as confident about that business structure either. Oftentimes it was a lead teacher who was the last and most qualified lead teacher still standing when the center director left. Right. And so now that person's been thrust into this role, not only doing what their craft is, their profession, their expertise, but also being hoisted and being asked to balance a budget and run HR issues and accounts payable and all these different things. Right. And so our centers are needing help. The staffing crisis is real and it's impacting even your current capacities in our communities. And yet some of that can actually be addressed and reduced as an impact just by us offering a helping hand. So once we've done that, we've connected with our family providers and in-home or outside of home providers. We've connected with our centers, our owners, operators, directors. We're now in a place where we've brought them to the table and we can confidently take a step forward on being intentional to add new childcare capacity or spaces. Right. And that intentionality, again, comes from moving away from the headline of we just need childcare to what is it that we actually need? What are those expected outcomes that we might consider as part of our goal in making this a better outcome? And so I want to talk a little bit about that stage, because I know here in Minnesota, as well as other places, as I mentioned before, we're really getting to that place of needing to activate. We know what we're trying to do. We have some sort of a plan, maybe even put together, but we need to be more intentional about how are we going to add that new childcare capacity. And so the way we help communities think this through, I want to share with you today, and it's building on this idea of intentionality. And it plays off what I said before, that headline isn't our answer. More childcare actually isn't the right answer. If we were to break down our needs around childcare, there's 3 key questions we want to ask ourselves. The first is being very specific, as I listed a few options before. What is the particular function or purpose of the need that you're working to get to? Where can we find that need? And what is the extent of the need that we are trying to address or resolve? Right? So what is the need? Where do we find it? And what is the number or the extent that we want to think about? And I think it's important to understand that this, again, takes a lot of different kind of resemblances, as it were, right? Any unmet need ultimately qualifies. If it's 1 slot, 10 slots, or 100 slots, any of those unmet needs could qualify. The key for you will be to figure out after that, where is that need actually needed? Right? Because this is the other thing that's often overlooked. I was with a county here recently as an example, and we were in the county seat, a rural county, about 16,000 folks. And we had a really good conversation, community leaders, business leaders, everybody. And towards the end of our time, I said, listen, it's been a really good conversation. We've had a really, good focused effort on what we're going to do here in this community. I said, but as I look at the numbers, the county has 16,000 people. You have 8,000 in this community. What about the other 8,000 people that make up this county? Right? They're not in the county seat. Half of your population is sitting outside of the county seat. So if we only think about it that way, where we only can find the need right where we're actually sitting, we're missing an opportunity to look more globally within the geography that we might be responsible or focused on, to say, if there's no childcare serving the other 8,000 individuals in our community, where do you think they're getting childcare? I'll tell you, there's 2 places. One, they're finding a neighbor or friend in town, or like we maybe have all experienced, they're driving the half hour into the county seat, and in some cases driving 45 minutes past where they live the other direction to their job. Because again, there's only childcare in the county seat. So I really highlight this because this is, I think, another lens of opportunity that's being overlooked, is don't just look in the major population centers. If we believe this idea that people want to stay close to home, Look at our smaller towns. Look at the Brunos, the Harris, the whatever town it is, right? That isn't the big town, and understand that those same needs, infant toddler care, second shift care, well, maybe not to a level that makes a headline, are still even 8 slots might be important in that corner of the county. So you get an idea, right? That we're understanding what is that need, but where is it located? And then this is the kind of $1 million question, literally, what's the extent of the need? Right? In many cases, it's a new family childcare. It's 8 slots, it's 10 slots. And people say, well, how would you get second shift? I said, there are actually people who prefer second shift, being awake, doing their life, doing whatever. They just run second shift. Right? We're caught up in this notion that childcare only happens traditionally in the quote unquote 9 to 5 time. And the truth is that none of our communities, none of our economies are only working a 9 to 5 range. And so just as much as we have needs for it, there are in fact, with the right conditions, providers out there that would be willing to take on some of these unmet micro needs. So maybe you figure out, yep, we're going to help somebody. We figured out a function, we figured out where, and now we're to the place of the number, and we've decided it's a family childcare. It's important to understand the barriers that, as I mentioned before, for the one who sat on the sideline for 2 years, the barriers to making this happen. And the big one, and it's universal for any new small business, right? This is where childcare is no longer the difference maker. Every new business benefits from startup support, benefits from startup help. To figure it all out, right? Because if anybody of you have started a business before, we realize at some point we're wearing a million hats, and we're not as confident, right, about what all those hats mean or how to do those hats. And so getting organized, getting positioned to start up definitely is something that we have to be mindful of. We're also understanding more and more pre-pandemic. This country was short more than 6 million physical spaces for childcare. So while the crisis of operations and all of the doom and gloom that's been making the headlines there, the universal fact that continues to be the case is there's simply not enough space. If there were enough operators and money and there wasn't an operating issue, there's not enough space today to meet the needs of all the children that would benefit from childcare. And as I mentioned before, business planning, business support, even helping, as our organization does, with some of the financial modeling up front. So we're setting people up with valid expectations, and we're running the math, and we're not using hope as a strategy for our success moving forward, right? Anybody who's run a successful business, you all are here, I'm sure, doing successful things in your work. We have a plan that makes that work, right? We don't just wake up one day and it happens. Sometimes people think that's the case, but the truth is, underlying any good successful outcome, outside sometimes a little bit of luck, is a plan that's based in reality, rooted in math, right? And so we think about these barriers as you embark on this, as you hopefully leave today excited to maybe take a new step or a different step, or to reach out somebody that's reached out to you before to try to connect about childcare. It's important to understand some of the barriers that are standing before us. And the biggest one, not surprising to anybody, maybe somebody in the room has seen one of these before, right? But there are in fact no childcare facilities, ATMs, that you can swing by and grab the cash to build your new childcare, right? We are fortunate. I do want to highlight this for any communities who are maybe sitting with what we might describe as a shovel-ready project. Minnesota DEED, just last week, I think, was announced a new round of funding for childcare projects with a deadline of October 31st. I know our friends from Rural Pathways are in the room. Grant writing might be the challenge, but either way, if you've got a project, make sure you make time to dig into that. I can ensure, or I'll be sure to follow up also with the links and resource information there. But these are those pots of money that, as you can imagine, are out requested by 50 to 1 of available dollars. And so the focus here has been, historically, DEED has done a great job over the last couple of years of injecting additional dollars, again, tied into this understanding reality that if we don't have childcare, people don't go to work. They just don't. And so what can we do to make that happen? We leverage all of these different tools and these different things that we're thinking about. So as we wrap up kind of our time here, before we get to some questions, and I hope maybe some good discussion, I want to talk a little bit now specifically about what are those next steps, maybe not tomorrow, but maybe on Monday, that you can look at starting to get yourselves organized if you're not quite there yet, right? And even if you're at that place where you've got a plan and you're still sitting at the proverbial start line, sometimes our challenge is we haven't brought the right people to the table, or we don't have enough of a structure of a plan or a defined outcome to really gain that participation. Right? We all like to be a part of a winner. And sometimes what's lacking or has been lacking historically is we've just said, give us more money. We need more money. And that probably is not untrue. But as I shared the other day, my daughter, who's going to be a senior, and by the way, benefited greatly from a family child care experience. Both of her parents work full time. All that came from that, I can see it in her senior year amongst all the other challenges and problems that a senior daughter in high school presents. But I highlight this because in the old days, I'd go ask my dad for a 20, right? And if I was lucky, he had one in his pocket. Today, the kids say, "Hey, Dad, can you Venmo?" Right? Venmo me some money. Because no one carries any cash anymore. And I highlight this because more recently, here before school started, she had messaged me Snapchat. That's also a whole different deal. Hey, Dad, I need a $20 bill, or I need 20. And that was it, period. And so I just kind of let that go and carried on with my day. And a day later, she must have gotten smart. She said, "Dad, I need a 20 for a new shirt for the start of school." Which one do you think I put the old code in and sent the $20 on Venmo, right? The one that came with the specific ask and, of course, tugged on the old heartstrings of I need it for school. That silly example as it may be is also been our limiting factor. We've often gone forward to our communities, to our partners, to our workforce, employer leaders. We just need money. And I'll tell you what, where we found success is in Moultrie County, Illinois. They got $420,000 from the county board, who, by the way, doesn't ever give money to these types of causes. Why? Because as we will have delivered by the end of this year in 18 months, 150 new childcare slots. We're going to use that money. We're going to help our existing providers reimagine and check in on their business. And oh, by the way, when they do that, we're going to give them $800 a slot to reinvest in their businesses. There was a very defined ask that suddenly created an idea that we're going to actually accomplish something with this investment, this big ask. We're going to actually accomplish something. And I think that's been a big challenge for many of our efforts, is that while we might have loosely defined, we're going to create new care, or we're going to do whatever, we've not always tied it back to what's the benefit beyond the child and family, which is, I hope, a given or an expectation that we have as we embark on these journeys. Who else wins? Right? If we get more family providers into quality, by definition, we might think they might end up, as a result, providing even better care. Now, be clear, there's great providers at all levels of the spectrum. But my point is that output, all the providers means all of those kids now are going through an heightened or enhanced curriculum. They're maybe getting some different approaches that provider, and often they'll all tell you, went through it, didn't want to, maybe got through it. Oh, that was great. Learned a couple of things, confirmed a bunch of things, and I feel more confident about moving forward. So as we've identified our beneficiaries, we're now defining that desired outcome. It's the only way we're going to get participation. We then think about how are the best ways to get there, right? What are the plans that don't take us on the wandering scenic route along the river, but just get us to our outcome, right? Get us to the address for success. And once you've done that, it becomes even easier then, as you can imagine. I mean, this might all start to seem really simple for you, and I don't mean to oversimplify it. It's certainly a big take to take on, but once you have clarity on where you're trying to get to and what that outcome is, it becomes easier to find the appropriate implementation partners. And often that's a combination of different partners who have different skills, right? For instance, you'll never call me to know what you're going to do with the child in the classroom. Matter of fact, I tell everybody, put me in a room with 7 toddlers, I'm calling the parents in the first hour. Right? But if we want to talk about space development, we want to talk about zeros and ones and business and an understanding of what goes into that, you're going to call me. Right? But we're going to call our child care resource and referrals for programming support. We're going to call our wayfinders for additional support on startup. We're going to call all of the partners that can help put all the pieces together in a way that's most successful for the outcomes that we're looking for. And as I mentioned, unfortunately, not tons of funding and financing just laying around to be acquired, but certainly there are more and more investments coming. And even if we look beyond the normal cast of characters, we have regional foundations. Initiative Foundation has long been a partner with communities and providers. We have regional foundations. We have all sorts of things that sometimes we just have to know what it is we're going to accomplish with it to make it easier to match up with those particular funding and financing options. So maybe still seems daunting to you, right, to take this on. But as I began our time together today, you got to start with the address for success, understanding that we're not here to solve the whole problem. And even if your first win in the next year is only that you help support one family provider in your local community get started, remember and remind yourself that's 8 to 10 adults that you're going to unlock the opportunity to go do what it is they want to be doing. Maybe it's pursuing education. Maybe it's pursuing those open manufacturing jobs that we see the help wanted signs dotting our community. But at the end of the day, even those 8 to 10 slots will be impactful for your community, be impactful for the adults that can go to work, and most importantly, they're going to have a huge impact and a positive one on those 8 to 10 kids that are now going to have the opportunity to not maybe be shuffled between the grandparents and the friend and whatever other solutions we as families work to come up with in these situations. We will open up here for some questions in a moment. Also encourage our panel maybe to begin making their way up to our station. We've got a great panel. I'm more excited for you to listen to them than to listen to me. But as we think about this, it's also important to know, and I highlight this is with our partner, Southern Minnesota Initiative Foundation in Southern Minnesota. Just over a year ago, we worked with the Three Rivers Community Action Agency and other partners within the Northfield community to convert 2 empty open spaces in the Northfield Community Resource Center into what today are thriving spaces hosting 2 different family child care providers. One was an individual, when I met her, who had recently moved. She had a 2-year degree in early ed, and she was going to be working at Quick Trip. Why? Because her home she rented. And as anybody knows, most landlords don't want you to run a child care out of their home. So she was going to be on the sideline. The other was a mother-daughter duo. You can certainly learn more about them on Smith's website and their journey, but they're now together serving over 20 families in that community. And the foundations and the partners are offsetting the rent for that space. Three Rivers, Jane Barber, a great partner, does regular check-ins with those providers, which breaks down some of the isolation that we hear is a challenge for many doing this work. But at the end of the day, I highlight this story because sometimes we also forget that we don't need even $1 million solution to have an impact, right? This was not a huge take, and yet we've got 20 adults going to work now. So lots of opportunities to think about across the spectrum of investment, across the spectrum of size and engagement. My best advice for you, though, is always start with that address for success. So with that, I want to shift us to questions. I think the panel's getting set up there. And if there's any questions that we can address here in the moment, I would love to help share information or thoughts on anything you're thinking about.
We're ready with the mic, so anybody with a question, put your hand up, please. I know we've got some.
I'm not sure anyone can comment on this, but today's Minnesota Star Tribune talks about Stevens County and the pod. I don't know if you guys are aware of that. I was in Morris for several years. And it sounds maybe a little bit like the Northfield idea. This, there's a feature story on it today. I didn't have a chance to read it all. I was just wondering if there's anyone has any comments on that, what that looks like.
Maybe there's others in the room who have had an opportunity to learn about that. I actually had a chance to visit Stevens County and Morris here earlier this year. I met with Commissioner Kapitsky and Administrator Young. By the way, Becky Young has done a great job really leading this, certainly with Commissioner Kapitsky's encouragement, but a great resource. And when I had a chance to go visit and hear this story, it really plays off with, and I think credit goes to historically up in northwestern Minnesota, the Detroit Lakes area, Mahawa Otwa tribe has hosted 4 family providers in one of the local community buildings up there for over 20 years. And even a handful of years ago, I got to visit those providers and talk and learn about their experiences. And so that's where the original pod idea started. We as an organization now more call it as hosted spaces, meaning whether it's a building that's new or an existing, how can we as a community support a provider, right? How can we be a partner with a provider in a space? But when you look at the Stevens County project, I think there's a few takeaways outside of just the cleverness of what they accomplished. And for those of you who aren't familiar, I do have the article captured on PDF. I'll share that today as well. But the crux of the story is they built a 6-unit multifamily housing structure, 6 units across, all the same, 1 bedroom, 1 bath, community or open room. They all got a rainbow play area in the back, fenced yard, and they're all designed to host family childcare. So 6 units, each with licenses up to 12, maybe 14 after a while with a helper. But so 72 new slots, the construction cost right around 1.3 million all in, but they're built as housing units, which has its own implication and benefits. But the really fun part of this story, and I think it's worth noting, even if only anecdotal here, but we're seeing it play out in other places, is 5 of the 6 original providers in those spaces were new to the field. 5 of the 6. New to the field, meaning they will readily admit it. Their limiting factor was they didn't have a home that was appropriate. They didn't have a partner who was supportive, or frankly, as I had one family provider tell me recently, they didn't want to keep being on or have the idea of always being in their home. And as one provider doing this said, it's like being on house arrest, right? But they send 10 kids to enhance the penalty each day. Isolation, all of these challenges are what play into what we saw there. So 5 of the 6 original new. When I went out and visited the night before, one of the providers had moved out of the area, out of the region even. And so they'd done interviews for that one slot. Lo and behold, the 3 folks who had come forward also had not been doing childcare previously. So through the effort of building 6, they identified 9 people who were ready to go, but weren't activating because they didn't have the appropriate space. So that space is thriving today. All 6 units are occupied. And we have a project that happened in New Ulm. I was not involved with it. I think First Children's Finance was in the room, I'll partner on that. There's a number of opportunities playing out, and it's really playing off a more societal trend that we're seeing nationally is home ownership amongst the emerging generations at the lowest ever in American history. So when we think about our drive to get new childcare, get people open new family childcare, the factor that we are seeing anecdotally play out is they can't, don't want to, or won't do it in their home. And so I think the biggest takeaway there is if you do have a space, again, you don't have to build 6, you don't have to build something. If you have an appropriate space, and there are rules, right? That let's not pretend this will just open tomorrow. But if you do have some spaces, it's another way to get started without taking on the whole elephant, right? Of figuring out a way to start breaking down some of these barriers. I hope that helps. And I'll, again, share the article for everybody's benefit as a follow-up.
Curious out of what I see as the 3 biggest challenges for developing childcare and just getting some momentum around that whole piece. That the whole idea of obviously the reimbursement, here's my cost that I have to put in, and here's what I'm receiving back. The regulations around it as well. Then secondly, and then also just the recruitment or retention of staff. So out of those 3, and I'm really curious, maybe Minnesota or even Isanti County, out of those 3, which is top as far as like crippling, getting momentum in this area of those 3?
So I heard, and I'm sorry, I cut out just a minute. I heard staff as the 3rd one. I heard regulation as the 2nd one. I'm sorry, what was the 1st one?
Well, reimbursement of costs, or just, like, hey, the income that I can gain from doing this. Yeah, absolutely. My, profit loss statement, basically. Right.
And by the way, those don't look great for many of our providers, right? Even those who are doing their best. So reimbursement or cost of care versus sustainability of those providing the care. Regulation is a 2nd challenge, and staffing as a 3rd. And if the question is what of the three is the most dominating, I'm not sure. I think it's a tie almost in some cases, and it depends a lot on your community or the outcomes that you're looking for. The challenge that we're running into when people say they want to build a center, no matter how much that's needed, is where are the folks who are going to come run the center? Right? There are big challenges amongst a number of professionals, and it's driven by ultimately the amount of pay. When you're paying $12 to manage 7 toddlers, hoping they even have the fortitude to do that. But you can work at Quick Trip, that I love Quick Trip, by the way, but I walk through the front door of all of them. I often take pictures, $17 here, $19 there. That's a no-brainer, right? So part of our challenge comes back to your first one, which is the reimbursement, the cost structure, the math of childcare. It doesn't work. Art Rolnick, a number of years said it was a market failure, and it's a thing that continues to be repeated. Is the simple fact that as I was working with a center director, got down going through the math, all the modeling, and I said, "Oh, you pay $225 a week for infants." She said, "Oh yeah, that's what the parents pay." I said, "Well, but that's what you pay too." And she kind of looked at me dumbfounded, and she wasn't dumb. She was very smart. She run her business very successfully for a number of years. But a fact that's often overlooked in all of our understanding of this is she was paying $225 and the parents were paying $225, because with only 4 infants and you pay a teacher a decent wage that they can live on, it costs $450 a week to provide that infant care. And there's no reimbursement that rises to $450 in any part of the state under CCAP or otherwise. And so there's a shortage that has to be taken care of by some other input, right? Because she can't just pay that out of her pockets. Where's that money coming from? The preschoolers. And so as we expand, we're seeing some impact. So cost of care, the return to the providers, while it's often unaffordable for the families, it's often unsustainable for our providers. And so that math equation is wrong. It doesn't work well. I will give it credit to Minnesota and our leaders here in Minnesota is they have created opportunities for providers to actually illustrate their true cost of care for certain subsidy programs and realize a much higher increase reimbursement. So part of it is some of those tools that are taking place. Regulation is one that I think anybody for whatever reason can point as a reason. But I also remind everybody all regulation in this scenario often has come because a child got hurt or a child died in care or something tragic happened. And so we can argue for days about whether regulation was in fact needed for one child's death, but I just remind people, this is our children. And so the burden of regulation is often cited as a challenge. Why? Because we're paying that same person $12 an hour to put up with all the regulation. There's all sorts of people that do all sorts of more regulation than providers do, but the difference is they get paid the right amount to deal with it and to deal with all the extra paperwork, right? Our family providers are working 55, 60 hours a week just providing direct care. When you add training, regulation, all the other things they got to do, humanly it becomes almost impossible. And these are superhuman people, right? So that is sometimes part of it. And this again is where partnerships in the community, even helping support providers, getting through some of these things, understanding some of the things can take down some of the challenge that we see with it. And your last one around staffing is a real problem. And that's why I think we're seeing more and more situations like the Stevens County model and others where we're eliminating the need for staff and in fact creating new business owners. Because family childcare, they're just like every other small business owner on your Main Street. They run a financial, some better than others, just like on Main Street, but they're business owners. And so when we create environments and conditions where we don't need staff, but we can still deliver care as these approaches we've talked about here today can do, that's where innovation and thinking differently become so important. So I hope that helps answer, at least at a high level, some of those questions that you had there. If you were to pick one of the three, though, ultimately, it's the cost structure. It's our finances around childcare that's not making this attractive to get into or to be able to, frankly, just live and do. It's not the love of kids that pays rent or the food bill at the grocery store, right? And so we have to be very mindful of that too.
Any other questions? All right, we will move on to our panel.
Oh, I have one other question, Jeff. As we talk and encourage new people to go into this field, quite often we're talking to them about becoming a new business owner, and not everyone is comfortable with that. they could be a childcare provider for just 6 children. They don't have to have 10 or 12.
Yep.
And so will you talk a little bit about how we encourage those folks to join the industry? Because not everybody wants to see themselves as a business owner. That's very daunting for some people.
Very daunting, right? And I think there's also another issue that we are combining the word business and children. And if we're just being fair, that sometimes is uncomfortable as well. And so I think it comes back to what I'd suggested earlier as an opportunity for our communities is it is daunting. And for some, when you just use the word business, it automatically disqualifies the opportunity. And so what can we do as community leaders, as business leaders, as people who maybe aren't daunted by the word business? What can we do again to be just a one-on-one partner? Right? We don't have to sign up to help 500 people. You don't have to sign up to be doing this forever. But if you had even just a couple hours a week, I often find our work as a team is it's not anything technical. It's not anything that I actually went to school for, maybe. It's just having a partner, somebody that you can throw off an idea to, somebody who you feel is on your side to make this a success as much as everybody else wants it to be successful for the families and parents. So we see examples of shared service model that are being created both here in Minnesota. There's a few pilot projects. Women Venture has been doing one for a couple of years and some others. But how can we create that ecosystem of support that isn't intruding, isn't too much for anybody on our side of it, but is priceless, right, to that provider to your point, have confidence on, gosh, I don't know what all this is. I don't even know what business terms are. Right? I've met so many providers who were afraid to meet with me because they didn't really know what profit meant. Right? They didn't know what some of these terms are that maybe some of us take for granted, but just as much as we'd be fish out of the water if providers started talking about the ICHR scale and quality ratings and all of these other things, right? I don't know about you, I'm going the other direction, even though this is a field I'm so passionate about. So I hope that helps, right? It's just creating an environment where you're not going and doing this on your own. And maybe I, as the business professional, community professional, or just resident, doesn't know a whole lot about your world, but I'm willing to just be your partner, right? That in of itself, you'll talk to providers, such a big difference maker in their confidence in that first year, just like it is for any other small business owner, right? And that's what I think we all got to remember. They're small business owners, whether they see themselves as it, whether they call themselves at it, they are. They count in the number of small businesses in America. And so I think it's just that simple. Don't be intimidated yourself. And at the same time, let's create that environment where those who are intimidated can still feel comfortable to come forward knowing that they'll be supported. All right, I think that was the last question.
We got one more question.
Oh, one more, all right. You're gonna really love our panel here in a second. They're gonna have even better things to share, so.
Yeah, Jeff, I'm curious just on your travels and engagement in different communities and even around the business model. And you mentioned this business story of, man, they got 55 openings and they decided, hey, if we invest in some childcare, we can invest 300,000 to get to our 7.5 million, in earnings or whatever that. Are you seeing, or if you're not, why not businesses just say, hey, we're going to add on, 5,000 square feet to our business. We're going to open a childcare center for our employees here, and we're going to run this thing because we know if we invest 300,000, we're going to get the 7 million. Why isn't that happening? Why isn't that specifically taking place where businesses are just driving this because they obviously have the greatest need, right?
Yep. I can tell you a couple main reasons, and we are seeing increased participation, but still at a very nominal rate. And I think part of that fundamentally is that if I make widgets, I don't want to have a childcare is not my business, right? And this is not just a hobby. This is not just a, hey, you throw the building up and the kids come and everybody's happy, right? It's a big undertaking that comes with a lot of liability, even by name, when you start to participate in things like this. So I think that's one is a core business consideration. I think the other is the know-how and knowledge to do it. I had a manufacturer in southern Minnesota. They opened their own center. And it's doing okay, but they would tell you they wish they hadn't done it because it wasn't as easy as they thought it was. They were great business people, right? But the reality is when you start doing the reality of this work, it's not as clean cut as what we can put on 1 + 1 = 2 on on the sheet of paper. What we are seeing and what that example that I highlighted is more and more becoming popular, which is to say no one on their own can do this. But what if we as a community created the vehicle in which those companies, those organizations, and a reminder, workforce can't solve this problem either. We often always go to our business community, but they can't do it all. It really requires all of us to do it. But it's finding ways where they can more appropriately participate without taking on the burden of actually doing it right. Right? Just as though we would be uncomfortable running the widget factory, they're just as uncomfortable running the childcare. So there are IRS opportunities for participation, both in on-site and near-site care that benefits employees. There's even benefits for organizations and businesses to support the referral agencies, right, with a tax write-off and deduction. And I expect there'll be more work on that piece of it. But I think they're just one part of the solution. I caution anybody based on dollars and cents and what we think might be the case to not necessarily expect the business community, the workforce community to take on that burden all their own. But we are seeing more. You just need the structure for them to be able to participate, right? Maybe it's creating a childcare focused association, brings in the providers, but also creates a venue for everybody else that's at this proverbial table to continue enduring and being more focused and organized. That then becomes the vehicle to write the check to. Because that's the other issue a lot of times. We don't have a formal agency that's taking the lead on a project like this. So if I am an interested business, big or small, how is it that who do I write the check to? So those are some of the things that we help communities think about as well. I hope that helps. Great questions. I hope the conversation so far has been good. But I'm most excited, and I have been because I've worked with I think just about everybody on the panel today, and we're gonna have a chance to over the next 60 minutes or so really dig into what those before you are working on in real time, and where are their successes coming from, and maybe where are the challenges that they're seeing as they're trying to get to some of the outcomes that we as a community and a society are so much a part of. So I'm going to give it a chance we'll start real quick with a round of introductions, name, the community, title, organization, and even just a quick high-level summary of, in a snapshot, how they're engaged in this work and the things that they're doing. So I think everybody's in order, but I'm gonna let you guys kind of take the run from here and we'll get some introductions going.
Okay, hello, I'm Kathy George, City Administrator in Sandstone, and our role with our daycare center has been the owner of the building.
Very succinct. I feel like mine's a little more, well, we could go on. My name is Tamara Loney. I'm the president of Itasca Economic Development Corporation in Itasca County. We serve through economic and some community development, but most recently we've been trying to collaborate with the childcare providers and educators within Itasca County and kind of provide a landing space for them to come together, since uniquely in each of their own organizations, their capacity is really limited and they're thinking about how they can work on their challenges. So just trying to serve as an overarching sort of bringing folks together.
I'm Jackie Skelly. I am the Executive Director of Itasca Area Schools Collaborative. It's a collaboration of 7 school districts and Minnesota North Itasca College. And so the 7 districts are Grand Rapids, Big Fork, Deer River, Northland Community Schools of Reamer, Hill City, Floodwood, Nashua, Kewaunee, and Greenway. They span over 4 districts. So we serve Itasca, Cass, Aiken County, and St. Louis. So in the context of that, we provide the school districts, and I'll tell more about that later. The school districts have been the primary source of childcare for a lot of different reasons, and I'll explain that as we go through. But because of some changes, that is shifting. And so we're trying to work to support our communities and build childcare in our communities. Part of Itasca Area Schools Collaborative is I'm also the Director of Special Education for 6 of those districts. And I also oversee early childhood career pathways and technology. So we're trying to make it so we're not so siloed, but we're working across. And so if I have a career pathways program, how can I support workforce development also going into childcare? And so those are the kind of things I'll be able to refer to.
I'm Stacy Gilpin. I am with the Rural Pathways. We're an organization or an LLC, and we support all sorts of nonprofits with fundraising. We do grant writing, program evaluation, data research. As far as a little bit about my history, I've lived in Cambridge, so I'm familiar with this area. I also, have lived and worked in Itasca County, and I worked with Jackie, in another life there. So that's the work we're doing right now, and I'll talk a little bit more about it later, but we have, a pilot project we're doing with an Initiative Foundation. We're working with 5 nonprofit childcare centers in rural areas and, helping them really get a strategic plan going for fundraising. Stability is really what it's all about.
I get two. Hi, I'm Beth Gruber. I'm with the Mille Lacs Tribal Economy. That's 6 census tracts in east central Minnesota where the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe has businesses or land holdings. It's fun to see partners in the room that we're already working with on these projects. So I work for Mille Lacs Corporate Ventures, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe. And all of my work really falls in what we call the place. And so the place is in the Mille Lacs tribal economy that you work, a place where your kids might go to childcare, a place where you call home. And we're working really hard to make that the best place for tribal members, but also, community as a whole. Like we're not just focused on tribal members. Like Kathy, our work in childcare space to date has primarily been as a developer or a business or the building owner.
Fantastic. So you can see we've got a great panel before us here. We'll start our first question. Tomorrow I'm gonna start with you. We're gonna mix it up so we get to get first view of it. But let's all take a run through and some of you started to allude to, but if you were to pick your top 1 to 3 things that you're working on, current actions or initiatives, maybe share for the audience what those are and an idea of where you're trying to get to with those actions.
I think what's really interesting in economic development is this is such an impact on our ability to grow our community, right? It's an impact on attracting businesses in. So it has become a real priority. And in fact, in the last week, we had a really unique opportunity coming to our community, and they're like myriad of questions that Jackie tried to answer were, where's the childcare? How many beds and how many people and how many children and what ages? And so it is very impactful on our economic development as well as community development. So we've felt that pressure over the last few years. And, IADC we're not going to own a childcare facility. We're not trying to compete with our partners, but we can look at them and we can see their capacity challenges. We look at some really incredible organizations in Itasca County, the YMCA, the Friends That I Ask, Itasca. I mean, there are a number of organizations that are more center-based, and then there are lots of home providers and sort of everywhere in between. And every one of those folks, without exception, is challenged by finding funding, finding partners, how do we sustain ourselves? There's been a very big change in the landscape and how some of those organizations have been funded within the last 5 years. And so they're really like internalizing and trying to find a path forward for themselves. And most of them don't have the capacity to look beyond themselves. Well, we all know that as a community, if we can rise up together and we can help all of those organizations be successful, then we will be successful. So our role has really been trying to navigate so many of these funding opportunities from DEED. We've pulled our partners together. Our community is an energy transition community. Are there opportunities we can leverage through that grant system? We have our own grant writer. And so, most recently, the DEED grant that came out that probably many of you are aware of, we've pulled together our partners and said, okay, we're going to have a meeting and understand how this impacts this group. Is this something individually you'll pursue, or as a group we can pursue? And so what I think our role really has become is number one, we need to understand the landscape. And number two, we need to help lift up the experts that are in our community, because we're not the ones that should be the spokespersons. We need to help them elevate their message for our state and federal agencies, so they really hear that voice. And we see this all the time in economic development, is that rural is so last minute, right? We're sort of the we're the afterthought. Hey, we've built a program and it works in 80% of Minnesota, but not rural, right? So it's really trying to help those organizations elevate their voices, elevate their needs, And by being aware across the board, helping them connect to each other so they can leverage the resources within the other sister organizations to help them find that objective. So I wish I had great success stories to tell, but this mission and this work with us has really been over the last 6 months or so. And I do feel that we'll be working together on some big grant opportunities in the future. But as an ED, I think it's all about lifting up the experts in the room and trying to help them find the right path forward.
Yep, you got the right cue. We'll keep going down the line.
Okay.
That's all right. I was supposed to go just here.
So the interesting piece for me, so again, I serve the school districts. The quick history, our area 20 years ago was granted the Invest Early Project grant. And so some of you may have heard of the Invest Early Project. And really what it was a project with Land Foundation and some community partners to see if it invested or if it paid to invest early in the life of children. The grant supported 4 Itasca County school districts with a pretty substantial amount of funding. And so it was over $2 million a year that was given to school districts to provide care from 0 to 5. And it was from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. And we did it 5 days a week. And what happened is we're now in year 20 of that grant. The grant has ended. And the community doesn't know anything different. And so they've only known school districts are the child care provider. And some of our small districts, like our Deer Rivers or Nashua Keewatin, don't have any home care providers anymore because Invest Early was the provider. And so really our biggest initiatives have been, how do we support additional early childhood options? So right now, and we've been working with Jeff a lot on this, we've rebranded. So everyone knew us as Invest Early. And like I said, this is the last year of our grant. And so we're losing $2 million a year and we're still trying to serve all the children. And so we've had to reduce our infant toddler program, we've had to reduce our summer program, because we did that too, and we've had to reduce our before and after school care. So we now serve from 8 to 3, which only meets a certain population of employers. But because of the work we've done, we have a ton of experts around how to report to DHS, how to license a childcare, how to get the appropriate things in place needed to be a successful childcare provider. And how can we partner on the preschool options too? Because some of our childcare placements are like, we're not doing this for preschool, we're childcare. We're trying to, and I'm not saying there's a huge discrepancy, but there is sometimes when you talk with people in the workforce. And so we're trying to make sure that and we're at the very beginning stages of really building this, but if somebody's saying, I want to have a home childcare, how do I do it? Because just to go on anyone can go on the DHS website. And if you work at DHS, I'm going to apologize right now, but if you go on that website, I don't know if I've ever successfully found something I'm looking for. And so for somebody to go in, it's very, very daunting, but if they were to call our office, we can help them navigate the system because everyone in our office has been doing it. So we're trying to help support people grow. I have high school students who are like, I want to run a childcare. We have them as part of an education career pathway. They can get a CDL when they're out of high school. They can start, which is the license you're going to need to run your own childcare. We can walk them through licensing. So we're trying to turn out the workforce piece while also figuring out how to maintain the financial piece of just serving 3 to 5 year olds from 8 to 3, Monday through Thursday. And so there are some pieces with that. The other piece is we're really working on educating the community because again, like I said, a community of 20 years does not know different. They have only known schools as the person or as the entity that provides childcare. And so we're really trying to provide that. Some of our communities, and I don't have a really easier way to say this, but some of our communities I feel like is just kind of sitting back going, we'll see, you'll find money. And so I feel like they're kind of waiting and they're gonna have to feel it before they engage in the process. And I have other communities that I work with, they go, we don't want the bottom to drop out. We want to be part of this now. And so that's the other piece that I think we also are finding our business partners. When we try to talk with our business partners, our female dominated professions, our healthcare, education, they're the ones that most engaged. When I work with manufacturing, they are kind of like, oh, childcare is kind of an issue, but it's not like this urgent thing. And I've said publicly, I've said it at a chamber meeting, I've said, if you think childcare doesn't affect your ability to employ staff, you're wrong. I'm just, and I don't know that, but I would bet a lot on that. And then, like I said, the last thing we're really trying to do is turn out workforce. And so part of our program is that we partner with the college. And so whether it's students in high school, or whether it's people just going through the college program to get that CDL, we provide placements for them to get the hours they need to be able to get the credentials they need to do this on their own. So, and we work with like the Y, and we work with Kutaska to say, will you do the same? You'll get workers, if you allow kids in, they have a positive experience, and then they get their certifications, they wanna go back. So those are some of the things we've been doing to try to, some of our success, which is still in building.
Great, that's a hard one to follow. But I will say, when I moved to Itasca County, it must have been in like 2014-ish or whatever, and you remember, and you remember when it ended too, right?
It was traumatic.
I'm going to keep rebuilding that. But I remember Jackie explaining to me like this thing about invest early. I was like, wait, like there's childcare in the schools and like all these funding streams and things. I mean, it really at the time and still is innovative. And so I really think that we can learn a lot from that model. And I know Jackie's going through a lot now, trying to figure out how to make it move forward. But yeah, that was it's an incredible model, and I hope that it's able to be preserved in some sort of state. So a little bit about the work that we're doing at Rural Pathways. Well, we kind of come in as fractional partners with childcare providers. And, you know, I don't have a background in childcare. I have a background in K-12 education and administration, things like that. I'm a trained social scientist. And my business partner and I, when we looking at starting our business, we've been through that business journey. We actually launched in May. But before that, Jackie was one of them, Tamara was one of them. We did a lot of just, you know, talking with community members and asking, what is your need? What is your need? What is your need? We're looking at coming in as you know, a business partner. How could we help? And childcare kept coming up a lot. Jackie talked about, you know, we need support with funding and fundraising and some of those things. Tamara said the same thing. We just kept hearing that. And then we got connected with Jeff, and we're talking about it and some more. And through that process, we decided there's a need in childcare, and like that's where we're going to focus right now. We can support, you know, communities with workforce and housing and things like that as far as fundraising goes. But we put together a Getting Grant Ready package, and we are working with 5 rural nonprofit childcare centers in northeastern Minnesota, and Initiative Foundation is paid for us to do this work. So they're it's like a huge Christmas present to these childcare centers when we meet with them and they find out like we can be part of this if we want to. And so we've been doing that because there's lots of benefits to being a nonprofit, and some of you may or may not know. So that's why the childcare centers were developed that way. So that's like it becomes an entity. Like, where does the money go? You have, you know, it's a combination funding stream. You have your program fees. You should have donations coming in from individuals, from businesses, and then grants. And I say you should have the donations because what we're learning, and that's why we're coming in and we're helping with this development piece, because these individual childcare centers, their executive directors are maxed out. They have, like someone said, they've come from likely teaching in a classroom to now all of a sudden they're in charge of a center that's a nonprofit, they're doing budgets, they're doing everything. And so they need someone to help with that development piece, that grant writing piece, that strategy. So we come in and we help organizations with that. And just something that we've noticed in our meetings as we're helping put together fundraising strategies that are sustainable is like the donation piece and the marketing piece. There's very little, you know, they're not asking, they're not engaging with communities and saying, you know, here's our need, here's ways you could help. Here's specific asks. Like we met with this amazing childcare center in Ely, and the Ely Community Foundation has sponsored the space in the facility for them, and I think they have about 40 slots now. And they just kind of revamped things and opened in August, and they have an outdoor kind of emphasis. And they go outside every day, no matter what, and they have rain gear and the outdoor gear, like for the littlest babies even, and things like that. And I said, and you know, we talked about that's a great thing that businesses in the community would want to sponsor. You know, and things like that. And, you know, and that when I'm talking about in Ely, yes, they're worrying about those things because they are in a different place than some of the other centers we meet with. Some of the other centers, like if you start to pull back the finances, I mean, they're just barely hanging on. And you hear about, you know, the childcare centers, there's been a lot of news in Duluth. And my husband, he's not involved in education or anything like this, but he'll be like, another one is closing, another one. I'll say, well, sadly, it's not surprising because when you start to look at the budgets and pull back all the layers, I mean, they're all just hanging on. And so anyway, that's not to be a downer on that, but I mean, I think it's just a reality is that's why I feel like the work that we're going out to do to really help the nonprofit childcare centers really figure out how can they, if you're gonna be a nonprofit, it's a lot of work. There's a lot of extra reporting and things that go on. You could just as well be an LLC, but if you're gonna be a nonprofit, we're really helping them. Like, how can you maximize this? How can you get your marketing going? How can you get your website up? How can you let the community know how they can help you and partner with you? So, and really, and a big thing that we're talking about, my last thing is when we're meeting with these childcare facilities, the first thing that we do is sort of a mission vision activity. And I think maybe one said part of their mission is so that we can have a vibrant workforce and economy, like not making that connection and really supporting them to see that, and communities to see that supporting childcare equals supporting business. It's really important.
Kathy and I have to follow all of that.
That's just.
Yeah.
You can blame me, that's okay, that's okay.
Something that was just said that's super important, and as one of the major employers in East Central Minnesota, we really have to keep our eye on like what's keeping people from coming back to work. As we all went through the pandemic and came out the other side, we're all still hearing at the coffee shop, I can't find anybody to come to work. I can't, I was just in our local hardware store and I swear the owner sleeps there because he is there all the damn time. I'm like, why can't you get, and he's like, we can't find childcare. They don't have housing. And so in our place pillar, we're really working on housing, workforce housing, affordable housing. People need a place to live. They need a place where they can, they need a place and they need childcare, and they also need transportation is a huge thing. If you're living in a multi-generational home, you might only have a half car or one car, and all the folks are trying to share it. And so, we're trying to tackle all of those things. And in that, we run casinos and hotels, and we love our children, and we send them to childcare because we're terrible probably at taking care of them. But we heard, like, we need childcare, and the one benefit we have at Mille Lacs Corporate Ventures is we have buildings. We have buildings that weren't being used, and so we looked to a way that we could repurpose a building. And so we were actually approached by the hospital who said, we're building on a brand new emergency room. We're gonna have doctors and nurses and x-ray techs and all the things, and there are no childcare centers. Like, what can we do? Like, can you help us? What can we do together? And we're like, maybe. And so we started talking to the Initiative Foundation, like, what do you know? How can you help us? And then we found out about the Amazing Deed Grant. And so all of us kind of put our heads together and developed a space. Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe said, well, we have this building, but our laws don't allow us to lease to non-travel members. Well, as a wholly owned subsidiary, we can lease to non-travel members. So we leased the building, we found a provider, she subleases from us. The hospital said, you know what? We just built a kitchen. We'll cater all your meals. And that's our contribution. So like, it's no cost to the provider. They just show up with meals 2 times a day. It's an amazing, beautiful thing that families don't have to worry about it. We've been able to add 63 slots to a community of 600. But what we found out later, and Jeff knows about this all too well, is we didn't talk to all the partners in the room. We forgot to talk to the school. And we found out that they have free pre-K. So guess who's suffering on the bottom line because the school is offering free pre-K. It's good for the community, but it's, not so good for the entrepreneur. So we're working with her on, how can we help you as you continue to ramp up? But also, can we help you on your business model? What does that look like? Maybe a second shift, maybe a third shift. What can we do to help with that? I talk about entrepreneurship, and that's something that we're really working hard on too, is like who in our community wants to open those child-based centers, or maybe open, or a home center, or, you know, a regular center. And so just helping them find the training they need to be a business owner. I think someone said, like, sure, I can take care of kids, but what does that mean about, you know, the books, and how do I do my taxes, and what does all of that look like? And so we partnered with the Initiative Foundation to do a 12-week training, whether you want to own a sandwich shop or you want to own a childcare center. But listening is really where it comes down to. We need to listen to what our employees need, to what our community needs, and we just want to be a good partner in all of it. Over to you, Karen.
Thank you. So our journey with childcare started in Sandstone with the North Span Group. They came and did a priority setting session with our Economic Development Authority and childcare. This was back in 2017-ish, I think. The childcare trauma loss, rose to the top. We had a whole list of things. And lo and behold, it wasn't too long after that, a young lady came in and talked to me, who had started a daycare center elsewhere and wanted to start one in Sandstone. I'm like, oh, great, we were just talking about that, okay. So we're looking around and she couldn't find a building in town that would work. So she kind of drizzled away. A year later, having a business breakfast meeting, and she was one of our presenters about social media. And I didn't recognize her because she looked different. And she started talking about her journey and the childcare. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you're a childcare lady. I said, guess what? We have a building now. And so she got on board and we worked on this building that we redeveloped. The city bought it, redeveloped it for our public works department, but also there were these beautiful classrooms, like a whole nother wing. It used to be used by the school, just sitting there waiting to be used for a childcare center or school. And right after we bought it, of course, there was a sprinkler that had burst. The building was empty, so it wasn't discovered right away. So there was this huge damage right in the childcare center part. So it began a whole process of redeveloping that building, dealing with the insurance and everything else. But the city redeveloped the entire building for those purposes, including a community kitchen and little community center room for over $2 million. No cost to the daycare. I worked with the daycare center to create its nonprofit status and then to get a board together for them and to, you know, eventually be on their own. And that was with a different executive director because the first one had gone on to other things by then. These things take a lot of time. Second one's on board, working with us to get the licensing and everything else that needs to be done for the daycare center. The city just stood right behind them. We fronted, we bankrolled all of the expenses. We did get a $75,000 grant from DEED to help with that startup equipment, which was nice, but obviously there's a lot more that is needed than that. So we bankrolled approximately $220,000 worth of money for them for staff, for payroll, for operating supplies, for the rest of the things that they need to run a daycare, for the licensing process, just for everything, insurance, the details of the building that needed to be specific to the daycare center. We paid for, the city paid for, that was about $200,000 in addition to the $220,000. So this is a very big investment. They use this space, which is a huge space, rent-free. They don't pay utilities. We're covering all of that right now. They are paying back their 2 loans, so $220,000, and that's all they can do right now for us. If we try to get rent from them, it won't work. So we're happy that they are paying us back for the $220,000. Maybe in 10 years, we'll get all that paid back, which is great. And in the meantime, they are licensed for 81 kids. And so it's huge for a small town of Sandstone. So we're really, it's a huge success, but it definitely has its challenges.
Some really great stories of current actions, current opportunity. And as I listen to all of them, I think we're hearing the benefit of partnership, right? And the benefit of working together. As we look at our next question, and just to keep it fun, Stacy, we'll start with you. I'm actually going to combine, because some of you have moved into different parts of this. as we think broadly about these current actions, if you want to talk about one of three things or all three, what's been most important as far as the strategy development? If you've already talked about that, maybe highlighting resources and support, right? Playing off this idea, it's not one entity's responsibility to make all this happen. And or is there particular messaging or engagement that you found to be most effective, right, in building awareness, building engagement, finding those partners? So any of those three or all three combined, Stacy will get it down to that end of the table to start off for this one.
Yeah, well, I can speak to all those, but I'll try to keep it to a minimum because I know others want to share. I think as far as strategy development goes and why, at Rural Pathways have we decided to come in as a fractional partner, specifically looking at childcare in rural areas and what we're doing come to be with our Getting Grant Ready package. A big thing was, for the most part, if you think about childcare centers, which is what we mainly work with. We could work with family providers, we're just not at this point. Is a lot of them did not have, none of them have a strategic plan. It's literally like, how can we survive from like this week to the next week? And so that's where we come in and we start with an assessment and we help them, we meet with their team and help them put together like a strategy, a strategic plan. But really the focus of a lot of that is on fundraising, is how to make it financially viable. So that continue to move on into the future. And so once we start to really, we really base it on assets, we base it on strengths and really how we can build off of those. And we always tell the people we're meeting with to think big. I find in the nonprofit sector, almost every time I go to a childcare center, I'll just name it, it's women running it. And a lot of times as women, I think that we have a hard time asking for what we need. And so we have really been encouraging the groups to think big. We can always pare it down, but let's think in the next 3 to 5 years for your center here, for the families, for the community, like what is your vision? What would you like to see happen? And we've had some really interesting conversations. We invite board members to be part of the process. And I think it's been very insightful for them. But I would say that from those meetings, it's really helped bring clarity to organizations and thinking about their way forward. There's always things that they've never thought about because once again, a lot of times in nonprofit childcare, it's just survival. And they've never had a chance to never had someone come in and say, like, what are your hopes and dreams? They never had someone come in and say, okay, you want to do that? Let's figure out how we can like build that backwards so that can happen. And what do those funding streams look like? And some of those things. So I think, so that's why we're doing what we're doing there with that strategic planning sort of thing. And I don't know if this is really resources or support that we're providing, but I really do see a need when we're out meeting with childcare centers for some sort of network. Because we go and meet with childcare centers and Charity and I, my business partner, we have the privilege of getting to tour all sorts of different centers. We get to talk with people and we can see what's going on and hear all their ideas, but there's not a lot of conversation between centers because especially in the rural areas of northeastern Minnesota, everyone is kind of dealing with similar things in their own ways. And there's all sorts of good ideas, but everyone's a little bit like in their silo. So that's something that there's not really a network per se, a formalized one, but that's something that I think as far as resources and support is really needed. Because a lot of times executive directors, you really hear it in their language, they feel like it's all on their shoulders and it shouldn't be that way.
That's hard to follow. I like a lot what you said. So I think what we're really trying to do is, like, we don't want to run childcare centers, but we want to provide a space for somebody to run a childcare center. So we're just looking at all of the communities in which we're doing business and where tribal members are living and making sure that we're the partner to come to the table to say, what can we do? Is it a building? Is it renovating a building? Is it capital? Like, like what is the space where we where we can play best. Because running the center is not the best place for us to be. But also, I think, I like the question you had about, employers, like, are you gonna build a center for your employer? And I think what Jeff responded to is exactly what we're facing is, we are a large employer, but not all of our employees need childcare. And it's because we have teenagers, we have 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds, 60-year-olds, 7-year-olds, and so it's like this kind of span of things happening all of the time. And so we're just really looking internally and saying, how can we be innovative in helping each individual associate, is what we call them, like help you on your journey? Is it, just turn in your receipt at the end of the month and we'll help there? Take your children to where it suits your community? Is it we build one in one of our facilities? But that is a lot of liability. It's not something that we particularly do well, so we have to subcontract that out, and it gets to be kind of, and then if they don't show up and it's midnight and they're calling, hey Beth, your providers haven't shown up, can you come in and take care of the kids? It's kind of not really where we play best, so we want to be the partner. I would say that the Initiative Foundation has been a super great partner for us. Thank you for that. We couldn't do a lot of the work that we do. Deed has been instrumental in the building we did in Onemia. And now we're looking, Hinckley is our next project to tackle, so get ready, Mayor Zeman. But we can't do that without Pine County. They reached out and said, hey, do you want to be part of this coalition that we're building? Pine County is huge. The place you are is kind of right in the middle. What can we all do together to have the biggest impact in the entire county? So we're super excited about that. I think we'll leave it there for now.
Pine County is amazing, I would agree. So I would just touch on resources and support. So I mentioned about the building, but once the operation was up and running with our second executive director, it became apparent pretty early on that things were melting down. Not everybody is accustomed to working with boards, reporting, delegating. So carrying everything on their shoulders, things were not working. And we have on our Economic Development Authority 7 members, which is the 5 council members and then 2 business owners or business operators. Well, 3, the mayor who has a financial background, 1 of the business owners who specializes in boards, training, and then the other one is a business owner who struggled and rebuilt his business and knows about melting down. Came to their board and had a serious, I want to say, come to Jesus moment with them, and things changed. New executive director, some new board members, and they are lessons learned. But because of the interruption, I'll say, of our EDA board, which we had no business, we own the building, but it's their nonprofit, it's their business. But hey, they need some help. And we were able to draw from within the experience on our board to come and meet with their board and shake them up a little bit, help them reorganize. And now one of the business owners that was part of that is the president of that board. So it's just been great to get that community support and also just the resources that you have right within your own people really helped that. Thank you.
So there's a couple of things I think that we try to do that are, I would say, indirectly really critically important. And one of them is that as community leaders, we're trying to help other community leaders, especially our businesses, understand how big of a challenge this is. And that's a challenge because many of our businesses are traditionally male workforce. And so one of the pieces that we've really tried to step up was capturing the data on from a state level from our regional analysts to really reflect how much you're missing out on. And so I would encourage you, if you don't know your regional analyst, reach out. Ours is Carson Gorecki, and he's fabulous. But to tell the story of if there were as many women in the workforce, even a fraction of the labor force as there are men, there are literally by communities, there's hundreds, by regions, it's thousands. that we're talking about that are not in the workforce. And we know anecdotally, there's lots of reasons for that, but a large portion of that is related to childcare. But one of those challenges with understanding the data is because we are so rural that it's difficult to tell the story of really rural places. And when you look at a small community and on the map, and when someone comes in and does a study, they're like, oh, there's no childcare needs there. And then you go to a community meeting and there's about 30 little children running around. So I'm like, oh, maybe that's not true. And so it is an intensively in-person labor. You have to be able to meet people where they are. And you as a community have to decide if you're willing to take that on. Because you can't just show up in a small community and say, oh, I get you, and then never come back. You have to really engage on a community level and know that centers are just not the answer for many of our rural communities. It is individual childcare providers. And I can tell you one of my most sad or stories that I remember when I started really thinking about, okay, how do we help small businesses? Because we are a small business consulting center. Childcare providers are small businesses. How do we help them? So we went to our county provider, and this person isn't there anymore, a really great guy. But we said, so what does it look like if someone walks in your office and says, I'm interested in starting my own childcare at home? And he said, well, and he brings out this 3-ring binder that's about 3 inches high. And he said, if they can make it through this binder, I know they're going to be a good childcare provider. I don't know about you guys, but most childcare providers that I want looking after my child don't do paperwork like it's, they're not a PhD in paperwork, right? Like they're good with kids and they're good at running, a little horde of children around without losing their minds, which quite frankly, right, and they're not necessarily small business owners, and they certainly don't think of themselves in that way. And so one of the journeys that we've been on as an organization, and again, trying to support a small business owner like a childcare provider is, what does that look like, right? And a big part of it is meeting them where they're at. Some of the things we've talked about is, are there ways for us to go into a home to help someone think about strategically, where do they go from here? And bring someone with us that can watch the children while we're talking about this, right? Because most of these childcare providers have their own children. And if you are from a small community, and your child is in football, they're in the community project down the street, they're so over engaged, it's really hard to find a good time to meet with them. So I guess our mantra is that this is a fairly new challenge for us, right? And so we're just trying to meet people where they are, help them figure things out, and most importantly, just try to elevate the voice, that need. And so where can we add this childcare challenge to a conversation with a manufacturer that's talking about expansion? One of my greatest exciting moments recently was that the Department of Energy has been working with us on a grant. And one of the other communities said, yeah, do you know that they're requiring businesses applying for tax credits to evaluate the childcare situation in that community and how that they will work with the childcare providers on that challenge? And I was like, hallelujah, like this is what we need. We need people looking at the community and saying, what can we do to help ensure that when we bring in our 200 workers, their children have a place to go? But it has to be a very top-down message before most of those employers are going to sit up and take notice. I mean, I know our childcare center, the YMCA, has several sponsored classrooms. Pawhutasca has sponsored classrooms, but there should be many more of those. The need is much greater.
Thinking about strategy, I would say, I go back to what Jeff was talking about earlier during this keynote, and he mentioned 3 things, and he talked about understanding the impact, which I feel like you downplayed a bit, Jeff. And I'm only saying that because we've spent a year in that spot, is understanding the impact before you develop the plan and activate the plan. And I'm saying understanding the impact again, partially from the education side of this. People didn't know this is a community issue, or they didn't think it's a community responsibility. Maybe that's a better way to put it. And so thinking about how do we identify that need in our community, and then a big piece of what we've been doing, when you have grants and other funding that's coming in multiple different ways, and if you think about how the state funds preschool, there's multiple different ways funding comes in. We had to get to a place where we could sit in front of people, whether it's a superintendent or whether it's a business owner or whether it's a person trying to open a childcare, and be able to say, what does it cost to educate a child? And that's a really hard thing. I mean, like, literally, I would say it's been a year in the works with Jeff of just trying to figure out what does it cost to educate a child. And what we've learned in that process, and it goes back a little bit to what you said, and I shouldn't say what we've learned, but what I've become aware of when I talk about understanding the impact is the school districts for 4-year-olds get funding to provide free childcare to families. What the community sometimes doesn't understand is, like, we apply for that in May, we found out in July. So when we found out in July that Grand Rapids, our only district that wasn't receiving voluntary pre-K funding, got voluntary pre-K funding for like 55 kids. All of a sudden now the Y has to close a classroom in September because all these parents pulled out. And now our name is mud in the community because we didn't partner on this. And the other piece of that is the state requires, so that's the timeline of how quickly this happens. The state also requires if you're providing education to students in a voluntary pre-K classroom, you have to pay the provider like a licensed teacher because they have to be a licensed teacher. And you only receive funding for 0.6 of that student. And we can't charge the family for the remaining portion, that 0.4. So there is still a gap there. And when I say that, when I talk about cost per student, that means a Head Start who needs staff to have a CDL to run a classroom doesn't have to pay them a licensed teacher rate. They can pay them at a rate, and I'm not saying that's right or wrong. It's a lesser rate, it's the reality. And I mean, there is also a case to be made for, is it a livable wage? That's a different conversation. But when we start to talk about cost per student, it also comes down to quality of program and what we're talking about. And so when you do have somebody with a teaching license, does that mean something different than if you have someone with a CDL? And that's, and again, there's different requirements and different expectations, but understanding that impact, and Jeff has put it the best in terms of me really understanding things, is we really own the workforce now. And so people, when they look for early childhood jobs, they're looking at school districts because we have to pay at a higher rate than any other community person. And so what then happens is people think we're in competition, and we're not. Like, so that's the piece where we have worked very hard, and again, the narrative in the community is often on point, and sometimes we have little pockets that aren't on point. But I would say the one of the pieces is if we get an application for a student in our pre-K classroom, which is an 8 to 3 classroom, and we don't have spots, but we know the Y does, or we know Head Start does, we give that application information. We say to the family, they have an opening. Can I send your application information to them? Like, we try to help get them placement. We don't want people to close. We don't want to pull kids. We're trying to do what the state is requiring us to do to make sure that we're offering things we're supposed to. And so that's been unique. And I go back to, in terms of having the grant, the Investorly grant, and then having voluntary pre-kindergarten funding, it really has just continued to push this, especially in our, I mean, I say, yes, we're rural, but when I think about our 7 districts, everyone thinks Grand Rapids is the, metropolis. And it's just, it's not, but are really much more rural communities where you're driving a half hour to get to the gas station, though they're open to daycares because of this reason.
Maybe remind, when you're talking about that, why that pre-K closes the classroom? Because of the cost.
Yes.
Just make sure, because we assume that you all know why, but I think that's a good point to
Right.
just explain quick.
Yeah, and so that, and this wasn't about that closing, but there is a piece too, when we talk about infant toddler childcare. The cost to run infant toddler childcare is so extensive that in order to sustain that, you have to have several preschool or childcares for 3 to 5 to fund that infant toddler slot. So as things get reduced, these 3 to 5-year-old slots get reduced to go to the free slots for families at the district, it reduces the ability to keep infant toddler positions or facilities open too. So the only other thing I would mention about that has been a strategy in this, I know this comes from a very, this is what I went into, this is my passion, but I also work with, again, I'm a director of special education for 6 school districts. I work with so many families who say, I cannot get my child with a disability into childcare, or if I do, they're getting kicked out. And sometimes it's just because it's not behavioral. Sometimes it is behavioral, but there's a whole other level of need for training and understanding and supporting students with disabilities in childcare, because those are the kids where the gap starts getting big and it's harder to close because the gap is bigger. So there's a lot of pieces. That's one other, we talk second shift and we talk bilingual care and all of that. I would also say care for children with disabilities. So
Just to clarify, you mentioned voluntary pre-K schools get that, but just so that all of you know, not all schools.
correct. So we have to apply, school districts have to apply,
Right.
and each district, depending on the formula at the state level, is then determined whether or not they receive it. So most districts, and I can't even say, I would assume most districts apply, but not all districts get it.
And most do not.
Yes, and so in our 7 districts, our 6 outlying districts have received it from day 1 of EPK. Grand Rapids was the only one that did not until May, when we reapplied and got that information in July that we get 55 slots for families, and then it directly impacted our community of home daycare. So yes, thank you very much for that clarification. I did have that written down to explain, but it doesn't mean I do that.
She's a wealth of knowledge, so it's hard to just dig out the one point.
Nope.
Why do the 6 districts get it and not Grand Rapids?
It had to do, some of it had to do with free and reduced, some of it had to do with enrollment. There's a whole formula, and sometimes the state changes the formula. Again, if you work for the state, I do care about you. I just don't understand all the logic sometimes. Yeah, it's just a really hard system to navigate, for sure. And you have to follow DHS requirements and MDE requirements, which are not, they don't usually talk to each other either. So that's another panel.
I was gonna say, that's the after lunch panel. You're all welcome to come back for to dig into it. I think what we're hearing from our panel, I'm listening intently. I think the big one is all being kind of described as the ecosystem impact of any decision we make, right? As being thoughtful about, in the pursuit of something that's really good, what might be the downside impact. And certainly in central Minnesota, we do have communities that, to the point of don't have any other childcare available, well-intentioned efforts have created an impact there. So I think that's a big one. We're hearing a lot about continued focus on intention. I think Tamara does a great job of highlighting the importance of engagement, right? Meeting people where they're at, not assuming you have the answer, but rather being an open listener, somebody who, as a problem solver by nature, maybe won't have the right exact answer, but can even be a partner, right? For some of our communities who benefit more from somebody local helping send that message, finding focus. And I think a big one that Stacy and Charity and Rural Pathways highlight is the ability to tell the story, right? There's a story behind every opportunity, and sometimes we skip the storytelling part that actually is the emotional attachment that our audience, those potential investors or partners are missing. I know our time is going to run out very quickly. I know lunch is on the other side of finishing up, and I apologize. I literally have to step off here in about 10 minutes to the other side of the other room to kick off another meeting. Before we get to our kind of last questions, and knowing that even after I leave, you'll have a chance, and I hope you will, to interact with all these professionals for more of the story. I want to highlight that from our role, my role, we're available for a follow-up check-in for anybody in the audience that would like to talk about how their community can get organized. We're fortunate to have support and funding from Initiative Foundation for those communities who are serious about taking some next steps around planning. So whether it's us, whether it's others in the room, others in the region, I encourage you to find a partner as you look to your next steps forward. And as we wrap up our time today, there's actually 2 questions left that I want to make sure we leave time for. The first will be, in all of this highlighting of great opportunities and things to come, can you highlight one challenge that you've really run into that you think is worth highlighting for others to understand, might be on their journey, and maybe briefly, what did you do to resolve that? And whether I'm able to still be with us at the moment or not, as we wrap up, what will be kind of your audience takeaway? What's the one thing for everybody in the room from your vantage point, if they remember nothing else, what's one thing that you hope that they will take away? And so just for fun, why don't we'll start it back at the front. Kathy, I'm going to call on you to give us a highlight of maybe one challenge that you've seen, whether expected or unexpected, and kind of how you've worked to work through it.
Well, I think I did address that with the board situation and the meltdown and our board coming along and helping them. That was kind of a big challenge.
Is there a
Otherwise,
smaller one though, Kathy? I know you did highlight that, but even sometimes small challenges precede
there's a
that.
flood in the building. Sure, I mean, there were a lot of challenges. First of all, just getting to the point where the EDA recognized that it's affecting our community and there's a need, right? Everyone, we were having the home daycare shut down just dramatically. It was very startling and it was a big problem. And so when we had that strategic planning session, you've got the people around and they know people who can't work because of daycare. They can't this, can't do that, can't whatever. And so that was the base, I suppose, where we had to start was the education piece, like everybody has been talking about, is getting the leaders to recognize that it's a problem and they might be able to play a role in the solution. And so I feel like in Sandstone, we had a big success because they recognized that. And man, for that group of people to be okay with shoveling out all this money to get this daycare center going, that's pretty huge. So I'm just gonna say that was a huge success. And I think that my advice, if there is any, would be to be open to opportunity. You never know when something is going to present itself to you, and grab it and go with it. Don't let it get away.
Kathy, just real quick before you pass it on, was there one particular data element that you think, and again, in this early stage, and this is why I'm glad we came back to this, was there one particular thing that you think tipped the scale for that group that you're talking about to find a connection to the problem early on?
Well, I think that most of your boards in your community are local business owners, or they work at the school district, or whatever the case may be. We have a federal prison in town, they work there. So knowing that once they focus on that topic of daycare, oh yeah, I know so-and-so has trouble because of this, or so-and-so has trouble because of that. And what are these local boards here for? Is to help their community and their community members. So when they hear it, like I could talk all day, we had the statistics, we had all the reports saying it's a desert, it's a daycare desert. We had all that information, but it wasn't until they heard from people out in the community that it was affecting them, that they were ready to open their ears and say, hey, here's a problem and we should work to address it together. So I think that was the huge turning point for them.
Great, thanks for sharing
Am I
that.
done? Am I done now?
Yes, yes.
I guess, I'll kind of keep mine a little short. I think for me, this pinnacle moment was when we started to really engage with some of our partners. And that light switch just really switched for us in the sense of we can be a partner here, and we can be a partner in a meaningful way without trying to tell them what to do, because we don't know what they need to do, right? So I think that's a really powerful thing and a challenging thing sometimes for economic development or community development organizations to say, because we're so used to, as Jeff alluded to, coming in and problem solving and fixing things and moving on. And this and quite frankly, housing for us, they're very similar in that they're massive issues in our community, and we have really great people working on it that have just this mountain on their desks to try to get through. And so what role do we play? It's messaging, it's engagement, it's collaboration. We do, I can't even tell you how many odd sort of, oh, Tamara, do you think you could provide a letter of support for this? Because we see the connection to economic development now that we've really engaged with you that we didn't see before. And we think it'll make our application a little bit stronger. And I'm like, of course, it just makes sense. But if you're not engaging at that level as an ED or a CD, you're kind of missing out. And I think they're missing out from you and what you can bring that to the table of the business partners that you have or the network that you have. And I think that's really critical. And we're starting really early. This takes a long time. And so what I would say is, if not now, when, right? If you're like, well, we can't take on one more initiative, it doesn't have to be this all-encompassing thing. It can start small with engagement and outreach to your childcare folks.
And Jackie, as you get started, I'm just going to again thank everybody for the chance to be a part of your event today. I apologize, I have to move to the next meeting. Thank you to our panel, a great group of individuals before you. I hope you will continue to engage them during lunch and afterwards. Again, thank you for your commitment to childcare in your communities. Have a great afternoon.
Let's give Jeff a round of applause.